So I've been playing with my Steam Deck a bit more lately, and because of some launcher stuff I needed for some games, I've been having to spend a bit more time in desktop mode. And since this mode runs on a full-fledged desktop Linux environment, I got really curious about using it as a real desktop PC. And it actually held up way better than I expected, even on this 2022 LCD model. I picked this up used about 2 years ago for under 300 bucks with a 1TB SSD already swapped in, so I feel very lucky about this one, especially with the recent price hikes. And yeah, I'm actually very surprised by how this performed as a real PC. Alright, so let me walk you through the setup I put together around this thing. For the monitor, I'm using a good old MSI MD271UL as a 27-inch 4K display with USB-C, and I grabbed it for around $250. And what I really like about this one is that a single USB-C cable handles power delivery and video, so the connection to the Steam Deck is super clean. For that price, the color accuracy is actually pretty solid, and the build quality doesn't feel cheap either. It's definitely punching above what you'd expect at this price point, so I love this thing. One thing my MSI doesn't have is built-in speakers, so I've got these budget Creative Pebble V3 speakers running through aux into the monitor. Really nothing fancy, but it gets the job done, and the sound is way better than I expected for the $30 to $40 price tag. Then for the keyboard and mouse, I've got my dependable low free flow 2, and for the mouse we got the LemoKey G2, both connected to the Steam Deck via Bluetooth. So these two connect right away as soon as they're turned on, so that's really convenient. So that's the very simple setup, one USB-C cable going from the Steam Deck to the monitor, and everything else is wireless. And then instead of an expensive dock that has a bunch of ports, I actually have a very simple $5 stand to have my Steam Deck standing on it, so the screen is well angled to be a secondary display. This is actually pretty useful. I've been using it to keep music streams live on here, or just videos I don't really need to pay attention to, especially when I'm doing something or multitasking. I actually much prefer playing videos on this screen instead of picture-in-picture mode. So yeah, it's just a clean dual screen setup, and it really doesn't take much. So desktop mode on the Steam Deck runs on KDE Plasma, and it's a real Linux desktop environment. So it's a full desktop OS where you can open Chrome, pull up Spotify, have a bunch of windows open at the same time, basically anything you usually do on your laptop or desktop. Performance-wise, it actually held up way better than I expected, even on this older 2022 handheld with an older AMD custom chipset. The apps launch pretty quickly, switching between them is smooth, and with 16 gigs of RAM in here, Chrome is also pretty decent with a bunch of tabs open. To be honest, it's not the zippiest experience, especially when you're using a 4K monitor, so I did need to put it down to 1440p for better performance. The only time I did notice it really chugging was when I was downloading a game on Steam while also doing other stuff while watching a YouTube video. The fan noise got a bit loud, but after the download was done, things were performing well again. Now the one thing worth knowing is that it's not limited to just the native Linux apps either. There are compatibility layers that let you run some Windows software on here too. It won't cover everything perfectly, but for the common small stuff like messaging apps, it will work more than 50% of the time or somewhere around there. KDE Plasma actually makes things very customizable, including the theme, so you can even make it look like Windows or Mac. And also key remapping and shortcut mapping is super easy in the settings, so I did spend some time remapping everything to mirror how I work on my Mac. So I swapped things like left control with the left command key, mapped the command key and spacebar to open system search so it acts like Spotlight. I also set up the command and tab for app switching and used the option arrow keys for window snapping. All these things are native features on KDE Plasma, so that's great. No need for third-party apps, and it was actually pretty easy to set up. And after all those changes, my workflow on this desktop mode on the Steam Deck actually became very natural to me. So yeah, after all that, the remapping, installing Chrome, getting Spotify set up, throwing in a few PWAs for the web apps I use the most, I'd say this entire experience already covers about 98% of what I do on my Mac on a daily basis. Browsing, writing scripts, email, watching videos, music in the background, keeping a few things open at once, and all that just works. If I didn't need to edit videos for my work, I really would just use this as my only desktop since I really don't do much besides that, and I also have another MacBook Air which I could just use as my laptop too. Really, the only reason it doesn't fully replace my Mac setup is that video editing workflow. Outside of that, this honestly just works. Now with all that said, I definitely have to mention some hurdles that I ran into when playing around with this, because KDE Plasma, even though it is a very nice UX, it's not Windows or Mac, so it's not a completely plug and play situation if you're used to those environments. It's very open and flexible, like being able to move around all UI elements around. There is no system level ads or tracking, but it is also so flexible that you're doing a lot of hands-on setup at first to get everything feeling just right. If this is your first time on Linux, expect to spend some real time getting comfortable with how things work differently here, especially things like sometimes having to use the terminal to get things to work, running into errors that you don't understand because of some backend system limitations that Steam set, and things like that. Then there's the whole app situation, which is probably the biggest problem for most people coming into this for the first time. Mainstream apps are almost entirely built for Windows and Mac, so you are constantly having to find the Linux equivalent for things you just take for granted elsewhere. One example I ran into was Blip, which I use as an AirDrop alternative between my devices, but there is no Linux version for it yet. So I've been using Local Send instead to move files over to my Android phone, and it does work well, so that's fine. And apparently a Linux version of Blip is coming at some point, so that's something to look forward to. So that's kind of the pattern here. You either have to find something that works for Linux, or you have to find some workarounds to make a Windows app work, and sometimes it works well and sometimes it doesn't. And then there are a couple things where there's just no real workaround. DaVinci Resolve and the whole Adobe Creative Suite, neither of those run on this thing without some major tweaks, which is a huge hassle. There are these open source alternatives, but if video editing or creative work is a serious big part of your day, the Steam Deck is just not going to do it for you. Like I said, that's really the only reason this can't replace my Mac Mini. Also, one thing, my Xbox wireless controller needs a firmware update in order to pair with the Steam Deck, and that update can only be done on a Windows PC or an actual Xbox console. I have neither a Windows or an Xbox right now, so I'm just kind of stuck with this Xbox controller I can't pair to my Steam Deck. So yeah, the hurdles are real, but honestly, it's mostly specific creative workflows and a few edge case app situations for me. For my other day-to-day stuff though, this is awesome. Then moving over to desktop gaming, because obviously that's a big part of having a Steam Deck. So keyboard and mouse gaming in desktop mode works really well here. First person shooters feel super natural, way more natural than buttons and analog sticks, especially for anything even slightly competitive. And the nice thing about staying in desktop mode for gaming is that all your open apps just stay open. Chrome, Spotify, whatever you got running, it's all still there in the background. If you can't get it to work, using a controller is also a great experience. It basically turns this whole setup into a console style situation, playing your Steam Deck on a big monitor. Yes, I do have issues with my Xbox controller, but in general, controller pairing works fine, and when it does, it's awesome. Now, in terms of the actual gaming performance, this thing actually really surprised me. Of course, these older, less demanding games like Persona 4 Golden and Halo Master Chief Collection both held up really well even at 1080p settings. Got no complaints there at all. But even the more demanding games like GTA 5 or Tomb Raider running at 900p or 1080p actually ran much better than I thought on this older hardware. It's just straight off of my usual settings that I play on my Steam Deck, just with higher resolution. Of course, you do sacrifice a noticeable number of frames here with a resolution bump, but honestly, if you're okay with 35 to 45 FPS gaming, then you're really not sacrificing much for much better resolution, and it's actually pretty impressive for what this thing can do on a big screen. So yeah, just like the Steam Deck itself, it's actually a really fun experience using this with a monitor attached to it with a keyboard and mouse. Older and mid-tier games play well and look good, and the keyboard and mouse gaming with the Steam Deck is a great highlight for me. The newer games, the AAA titles, definitely won't look great since those are usually played with low settings on the native screen anyway, but as long as your expectations are set right, then this is going to be a really solid experience. Alright, so those are all my thoughts on using the Steam Deck as a desktop PC. If you do have a Steam Deck and haven't spent much time in desktop mode, I say it's definitely worth giving it a shot, especially for day-to-day on your computer is pretty light. If you're someone like me who loves handheld gaming, but you also want a pretty clean desk setup that you want to be able to plug and unplug back into, then this is actually a really great way to do that. Let me know in the comments what you guys thought about this fun little desk setup, and if you'd actually consider using your Steam Deck as your desktop PC. If you like this video, make sure to like it, and for more tech videos like this, make sure to subscribe to stay tuned for those. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next one.